Using mulch is one of the best things you can do for your plants and your overall garden environment. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I discuss everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Today, let me show you how I mulch my garden. Mulch is a material that is placed on top of the soil. It differs from an amendment that is mixed with the soil. A mulch falls into two basic categories, inorganic and organic. An inorganic mulch has never been alive. It's things like rock, gravel, the hard materials that will never decompose. Whereas organic mulches used to be alive at some point. It's straw, grass, wood chips. Those are the kind of organic materials that I'm using in my garden. And that's what I'll be talking about today, the use of organic mulches to benefit our plants and make the entire garden healthier. Organic mulches offer many benefits in the garden, and there are 5 primary benefits that are the reasons why I like to use a lot of mulch. The first being that it helps reduce soil moisture evaporation. So an organic mulch acts as a barrier, and you want to keep your soil evenly moist. Well, that barrier helps protect the soil from the sun so the moisture is less likely to evaporate. It also acts as a barrier for weeds and weed seeds and the germination of those seeds. So an organic mulch cuts down on weeds. And because it's organic, it's going to decompose and enrich the soil. Essentially, it's like making compost in place. That organic mulch over a period of time will feed the soil within it. Another reason is that the mulch actually protects those soil organisms that are breaking down all of that organic material. Bare soil exposed to the sun can actually become quite sterile. The UV rays are very powerful and can kill the soil life in those top few inches unless they're covered by mulch. And another great reason, especially for someone like me that has very cold springs and very hot summers, is that mulch tends to moderate the soil temperature. So instead of getting very hot in the sun or very cold in the snow, that mulch now acts like a blanket and helps insulate the soil so the temperature is more consistent. Mulching is simply the process of laying a mulch on top of the soil surface. And I use different mulches for different areas of my garden to get some of those different benefits. So for example, this is a bed with perennial plants. I have some currant bushes, some comfrey, some rhubarb, some new flowers. They're going to come back every single year. So I'd like an organic mulch that will stay in place, eventually break down, but really help cut down on the weeds and that water evaporation. So I'm using wood chips in this area. But in this bed right next to it, I've got my asparagus growing. And I want to keep that soil for the asparagus continually improving. So I use organic mulches that are quicker to decompose, quicker to enrich the soil. So for my asparagus, I'm using dry grass, straw, and leaves. I just finished weeding this bed, which is a great idea before you apply mulch. Get rid of the weeds first. And now I'm just going to take some of this straw and lay it on the surface around these asparagus plants. The weeds that I just pulled will act as additional mulch. They'll decompose and break down and help improve the soil. And now I just lay out all this straw, cover the surface all the way around the plants. And this will cut down on the weeds, also reduce some of my watering needs, and the asparagus will appreciate it. For a bed with perennial vegetables like this asparagus, After I've put a good layer of straw on, I like to come back and mulch with some leaves and grass and even a few pine needles mixed in. I won't be able to get in here and amend the soil at the end of the season, so this organic mulch is the primary way of enriching the soil. And by having a nice good layer now, it'll break down over the course of the season and then even through the winter and really help to make this soil nice and rich for the asparagus next year. Leaves, grass, and straw are the primary organic mulches that I'm using in my vegetable garden. And I use them because leaves are free, grass is free, and straw doesn't cost much and it goes a long ways. I'll use them individually or sometimes mixed together depending on the plant and the bed. So for example, this bed right here has cucumbers that have just started growing. Well, if I use a straw mulch to cover the whole thing, those little seedlings aren't going to get enough sun to grow well. So I use the finer, smaller grass blades to try to cover the surface of the soil, but in a very light layer, because grass can clump together and actually stop the water from making it to the soil. So right now, a thin layer of grass. But as these plants grow, I'll now add a thicker layer of mulch, like the leaves and or straw. That's what I did with these pea plants. Started off as just a thin layer of grass until the pea shoots started emerging and getting bigger, and then I added a thicker layer of dried leaves. With my garlic, I started with straw right away because as the garlic grows, there's enough energy and the plants are strong enough to punch right through that straw. But on the end of this bed, I also have some more peas. So I pulled back the straw mulch when I put these seeds in the ground, and then as the pea plants grew, I put the straw back around them. I did the same thing for these beans that are growing at the end of my tomato bed. I pulled back the straw mulch and allowed the beans to grow freely. Well, now they're big enough that it's time to start putting some mulch in place. It's a very simple matter of just taking some straw and placing it around the individual plants. I'll water in the straw after it's in place. That'll help it settle and ensure that I'm not covering any of these plants with that straw. One of the problems with using straw by itself is that it can easily blow away, or at least blow around, like is happening in this bed right here. I just had a thin layer of straw after these asparagus plants emerged, but after we had some very strong winds, it redistributed itself around the beds. So now I need to add more mulch because weeds are starting to appear in the bare soil that's not covered. I can get away with straw by itself in a bed like that garlic or with those beans because the plants are growing close enough together that there's not a lot of room for the straw to move around. The plants essentially hold the straw mulch in place. But I anticipated the loss of straw when I put these plants in. I put pepper transplants and tomato transplants in this bed. And because they're spaced farther apart, I went ahead and put in a mulch that was already a blend of the grass and the leaves and the straw. For this hugelkultur mound, I've mulched pretty heavily with wood chips and pine needles. Because it's elevated and because it's got that slope on it, after some of our heavy rains, it's very possible for the soil to erode and start washing away. That's another benefit to the mulch. Not only will this help keep this mound moist with this thick layer of wood mulch, but it will help with soil erosion. It'll keep the soil in place. And I did the same thing with these goji berries that I put into a mound. It's not a hugelkultur mound, but because it's elevated, it's more likely to evaporate faster. So I've got the wood chips on it. And I'm concerned about some of the soil erosion. The wood chips help with that too. A key point to remember is that mulch is not just for raised beds. It's also great for open in-ground beds like this one. I recently amended the soil, so it's quite soft. I want it to stay nice and moist so the organic material can break down, and I've added a blend of those mulches. Another benefit comes in especially in open beds. The mulch will help reduce compaction, because if I walk anywhere on this soil, it's going to compact. Well, it acts as a little bit of a buffer, a cushion. So if I do have to walk on some of this soil to deal with these plants, the mulch reduces some of those compaction issues. I even mulch in my grow bags. Grow bags are very susceptible to the soil drying out quickly. So a layer of some grass and leaves, and I have less of a concern about these grow bags getting too dry. I get a lot of questions about how to use pine needles in the garden, and this is one of the ways I use them as a mulch in the pathways between my beds. They're very slow to break down, and they're very effective at covering the soil, so very few weeds will pop through. Eventually, even the soil in these pathways will be enriched by these pine needles. One day, this area of my garden is going to look much different. I'm going to have some concrete beds around the edges, some different edging, some formal pathways. But I want these plants, these are currants, to start growing and to get big enough so that by the time I get the rest of this project done, I'll be ready to start harvesting some currants. Well, if you look around, there are a lot of native plants growing around this bed. But because I have about 4 to 5 inches of wood chips here, you can also see that none of these native plants, none of the weeds are growing through this space. So these plants can grow and thrive, and I don't have to worry about getting in here and weeding this area. The choice of organic mulch is open, and it's really entirely up to you. I use the leaves and the grass because they're free. They don't cost me anything. I'll pay a little bit for the straw, but I think it has the benefits to allow for that. And as to the pine needles and the wood chips, I get those for free as well. So I'm not going out and buying mulch. I'm just using what I have available, which is why I say you should do the same. And the basic concept of smaller, lighter mulches for smaller plants, or the thicker, heavier mulches for the bigger plants, gives you a basic idea of which mulch to use in your beds. At the end of the season, on the beds where I have the mulch that is the grass and the leaves, I'll just turn it into the soil, and it will decompose in the fall and the winter and the spring and be ready for the next season. Another great benefit. The wood chip mulch, I don't turn that into the soil. I don't do the same with the pine needles, which is why I use them in my perennial beds. But how you mulch and how you use your ingredients is one of those things that it's a personal choice. And you'll learn more with experience and figure out just exactly what it is you prefer. If you got any benefits from this video, well, please give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing to the GardenerScott channel if you haven't already done so. And be sure to click on the bell so you're notified when new videos are coming out every week. And also the live stream that happens on Mondays. I'm GardenerScott. Enjoy gardening.